Hello, this is Flora Jambor joining in from Planet Budapest, where with key speakers of the event, we are talking about the topics of sustainability. And these experts play a huge role in shaping the world and the environment. So now we will have a little chat with them. Come with us. And now I have here in front of me Mr. Hans-Paul Bürkner, who I am pretty sure you have heard the name of. And if not, then probably the name of his company certainly rings a bell, because he's here on behalf of the Boston Consulting Group, one of the so-called big threes, and he's currently the chairman of the company. He was previously president and CEO for the company for 8 years, and he was actually the first European chief executive of the firm in its history, if I'm correct. Hi, Mr. Bürkner. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Great to be here.
Mr. Bürkner, speaking at a managers conference in 2021, you've stated something that the three most important tasks managers are currently facing are digitalization, regionalization, and localization of supply chains, and sustainable development. How do you see the market evolving towards sustainability, and what forces have pushed companies to behave sustainably? I'm thinking here about consumer pressure, pressure of the government, or NGOs maybe. What do you think?
Well, obviously, sustainability is a question of the very existence of the people, of the earth. And I think managers, like everybody else, are concerned about the well-being of people, of the world. And therefore, I think, of course, they are also very interested in contributing to fighting climate change, to really create a sustainable world. There is, of course, pressure from consumers. There are more government regulations. There is civil society, NGOs, and so forth. But I think one should not underestimate that many of the managers across the world also want to really contribute and make it work.
And you've also mentioned digitalization, and now I would like to quote one of your sentences that you wrote. You wrote that to succeed in the coming decade, companies in every industry will have to act like tech companies. What do you think? What can we learn from these big tech companies, and how can that knowledge be transposed to the traditional business model?
Well, first of all, I think we all agree that digitization will change every industry, every company, and actually all our lives. And so we need to use technology and digitization wherever possible. And I think one of the key elements is to be open to the changes, open to the opportunities. When somebody tells you, you can get more information by using a certain platform. You can get better information about products and services, about prices and so forth. You need to use them, or you would use them, hopefully. When you learn that you could improve your supply chains, your production process, you can improve your service to customers, you can better understand the needs of customers by really engaging with social media. Wouldn't you use that? And I think one of the key elements for companies, and that I was emphasizing when mentioning that we need to act like tech companies, is to be open, to see the opportunities, to learn more about your customers or your suppliers or your people internally, to learn more about your processes, production processes, service delivery, how you can improve it, how you be faster, can you respond. And I think one of the things is really to be open. Secondly, to experiment more, and also to not to develop a new product over 2, 3, 4 years, but to develop them maybe together with your customers, bring them to the market, find out what works, what doesn't work, and then make changes or drop things because they don't work. So I think one of the key elements is really to be what consultants usually refer to as being agile. Open, faster, and then change things, improve things, drop things, and then move on to the next thing. And rather than trying to hold on to old models, I think it's really important to be much more responsive to changes and to be willing to make those changes very fast. And also to accept when things are not working, you just drop it.
There is a concept gaining more and more popularity nowadays, the concept of the so-called ESG companies, the acronym standing for environmental, social, and governance companies. What do you think, how big of a balloons are these companies? Because we've seen the balloon of tech companies burst once before. What do you think, what is the real value of these ESG companies? Aren't they overvalued? What do you think?
Well, ESG, refers to the 17 ESG goals of the UN that, hundreds of countries and, tens of thousands of companies have, committed to pursue. And so I think there is, everybody has, is one way or the other, to be an ESG company because you want to contribute to the environment, to social development, to economic development, to equality, gender equality, treating people in a respectful way, having diverse teams and so forth. So I think we all, in one way or the other, all companies embrace the 17 ESG goals. I think it's very important to keep this in mind. And of course, there are some companies who try to position themselves as we are particularly strong on this and we are focusing entirely on this. Of course, part of that is marketing. We talked a lot about, many companies are putting up nice brochures, but I think the key really is, or the proof of the cooking is the eating. What do companies really do? Do they have clear KPIs, key performance indicators? Do they follow them? Do they report them? Is somebody checking this? And I would say, I think it's good that companies have these goals. I think it's good that they measure themselves, but I don't think that anybody is perfect in making them work yet. Because, quite honestly, pursuing them all at once and all 17 with all the sub-goals, you probably know that there are, dozens and dozens and dozens of sub-goals. So that probably will be not possible.
Especially in a long term, I guess, right?
Well, in the long term, I'm sure we get better over time, but certainly in the short term, it's not possible.
On digitalization, just a word on that topic. You recently said in an interview that in the light of current demographic trends, the only way to achieve real economic results is to enhance productivity. How do you think this productivity can be enhanced through digital solutions?
Well, actually, when you go back over the last 150 years, the whole industrial revolution is about automation and how people and machines work together. Yeah, and our productivity has increased massively. The average working week was 80 hours 120 years ago, and now we are at around 40, 36, whatever the norms are in the specific countries or specific industries. I think we do a much better job. We work much less in order to produce, a TV, a car, fruits from the fields and so forth. So I think digitization will be just another step, increasing productivity, but increasing productivity by generating more with less human interaction, but also in less time. And I think, for example, we talked about sustainability. I think we have seen, and at BCG we have helped companies in cement, in steel, in refineries to really reduce their emissions by 10, 20, 30, 40%. You can have the same ton of cement producing maybe half of the CO2 emissions. And I think that's a major step forward. I would say that's productivity, and of course it's also less costly. Less emissions means less energy consumption, means lower cost at the same quality, which I think is a major step forward. And you can go through industry by industry, where by measuring the whole supply chain, what are the outputs, where are the pain points, where is waste, where is leakage. I think it can make can do a massive improvement. I think also in the developing countries, when farmers know when to plant because of weather conditions, what kind of fertilizer, what kind of insecticides to use, how much, they can really economize. And then also when to sell their products, where to sell their products, and even in the rural areas in India, you can get this information on your mobile phone and can really enhance their productivity. And at the same time, you can also cut out a lot of the middlemen so that the farmers get a lot more benefit for their own work.
Glad that you've mentioned the topic of supply chain, because that would have been the third topic I would like to ask you. Because supply chains are constantly being transformed, once due to the pandemic of COVID-19, once because of the war with China. But what are the main aspects along which the supply chains will be restructured? And what do you think, what are the, or we can actually see that companies are driven, European companies are driven more and more to move back to the continent, to Europe. What do you think will be the main aspects for these restructuring?
Well, you know, there's a lot of talk about reshoring. Yeah? And, you know, it happens in a few places, but it's not as if we see massive movements out of China or out of Asia back to Europe. I think what is very important is to really look at the supply chains and look at, you know, how fast can we respond, what's the quality, what's the cost you're having. And there are many good examples where, yes, the lowest cost provider may be from China, but the delivery times are very long, especially now that we have congestion at ports and in some other places. So you think, you know, can I move it closer to my home factory? Also, if the parts don't have the right quality, you know, trying to solve this with a supplier who's 1,000 kilometers away is much more difficult than if the supplier is a few hundred kilometers away. So I think, yes, you have to look at this all the time. You also have to be, of course, aware of the geopolitics, the friction. You talked about the war with China. You meant, of course, the trade war.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, and there's not just trade conflicts between the US and China. It's also US and Europe. There's between India and China. And even within Asia, even within Africa, there are quite a lot of frictions. And so I think you need to take the economics into consideration, the logistics, the geopolitics, in order to say, you know, is my supply chain still, you know, the right one? Or do I have to shift things, maybe more closer to home, maybe part of the European Union where the rules and regulations are the same, and you cannot just suddenly impose a tariff on imports from Hungary, you know, to Germany, for example. Yeah. So I think that's something that everybody has to take in consideration. That's why the supply chains are changing, but it's not so trivial. Samsung had a lot of factories in China. They have just closed their last factory in China last year and moved a lot to Vietnam. And it has been a horrendous effort. I mean, they have not done it over a year or two. This is a 10-year effort. And so whenever you change your supply chains, creating ecosystems in a new country or in a new region is a huge effort with enormous investments, and it takes really quite a lot of time because it's not just one factory that you're moving. You have to move the whole range of suppliers with it because parts are not happening because just one supplier produces them. There have to be lots of suppliers around this factory in order to make it viable.
Mr. Bruckner, I cannot thank you enough for being here, and I wish you a fruitful stay in Budapest and at the Planet Budapest event as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.